Welcome to the Finding the Magic podcast, where books come alive. I'm Tricia Copeland, a fiction author and host of this show. If you love books, finding great reads, and hearing about the story behind the story directly from the authors, this is the place for you. Whether you like fantasy, science fiction, dystopian, or romance titles, I think you'll find something to love in my playlist. Listen in to discover something magical about a book or two today. Welcome, Aimee.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me, Tricia.
Thank you for being here today. We have YA fantasy author Aimee Phan. They might roll off your tongue. You have several other books that I found that we can talk about if you'd like to. But today we are talking about The Lost Queen, and I'm just loving the premise of this book. Jump in and tell me everything. What's the world? Who are the characters?
Great. This is a book about a girl named Jolie Lam. She is a sophomore at a high school in San Jose, and she's a little bit of an outcast at her school because her grandfather is a fortune teller who has recently gone rogue and has been talking about dragons and the end of the world. And she recently lost her two best friends, left the swim team, and is feeling very alone in high school, which I think a lot of kids can relate to. And one day when she is in her gym class and she is swimming, she has a magical encounter under the water where she is saving a girl from drowning. She sees a girl that is at the bottom of the pool. And when she swims down to save her, they make a connection. And these two girls soon realize that they are the descendants of the Chung sisters, who are the ancient queens of Vietnam. And this is a myth based on the Chung sisters, the Hai Ba Chung. And they are endowed with these magical powers, and they are trying to figure out the mystery of what is happening in the world and what they must do to save it.
Ooh. So do they think they're like reborn? Is this sort of like reborn souls?
Yes. So it turns out that they both are the reincarnated spirits of the Trung sisters, but they haven't regained all of their memories back. And so throughout the book, they are slowly regaining their memories and trying to understand what the dangers are in their present world, and also rediscovering what happened in the past that got them to this place.
Okay, interesting. So is it set in present day time?
It is. It's set in San Jose during present day time, San Jose, California. So that is in the Silicon Valley, not too far from like Facebook and Google and all the other tech companies. And so the high school environment is already rather intense socially and ambitiously. And Jolie is a character who I very much related to. She feels a little bit lost. She feels a little bit behind everybody else. She feels very disempowered after losing her friends and feeling ostracized because of her grandfather, and learning that she is the reincarnated queen of Vietnam helps her to realize that she has more power, more strength than she thought she did before.
Well, I am correct, right? You are Vietnamese American, right?
Yes.
So was this really neat for you to like research all the history? How much research did you have to do for this?
Well, what was really fascinating to me about the Chung sisters mythology is when I first started reading about it, there's not that much about them, right? They are these ancient military leaders. They are considered the founders of Vietnam. If you go to Vietnam, you will see these temples and these statues, lots of things built in their memory. But the historical information on them is rather short. What I was finding was only like a paragraph. They often make up like a small sliver in Chinese history. They are considered the two queens who rebelled against the Han Dynasty of China, because Vietnam, the region, used to belong to the great kingdom of the Han Empire of ancient China. And I remember hearing from my parents about the Hai Ba Chung, the Chung sisters, and how proud people were that the country was from this matrilineal society. And I just wondered as a writer, what would have happened if those two queens, like the story goes that they rebelled against the Chinese and they ruled for 3 years. But then after those 3 years, they were taken over again by the Han Empire. And rather than surrender to the Han troops, they killed themselves. They committed suicide. They drowned themselves into the river, or in other versions of the story, they jumped off a cliff. And I remember thinking to myself, well, what if they, they didn't land? And so there are some myths, some versions that say like they rose to the sky. And so I love this idea that they didn't die and that they are reborn in another way. And so researching this helped me, of course. I love to research and learn more about my heritage. I was born here in America, but all of my family, is Vietnamese and have these wonderful memories that I don't have. So it's my way of rediscovering my past, rediscovering my heritage, and also providing a story that I think I would have really have loved to read when I was a child or a teenager. To read about a Vietnamese heroine, I think would have been really special and important. And what I like is that this character is also discovering alongside reading this just like me, but also realizing she's that person, right? She has the strength within herself. So it was wonderful to be able to research and to also just take the story and run away with it, because that's what you can do in fantasy. When I first started writing the story, I thought I was going to write a really realistic story. But the wonderful thing about the young adult literary genre is that you can really do anything you want. And even though I had never written YA before and I had never written fantasy, I realized that's where the characters in the story wanted to go. It wanted to do fantastical things. And these characters wanted to do magical things to really embody like the freedom and the strength that they have.
That's really exciting to hear, like how that formed in your mind and how the story took shape. Because when you started writing, did you think it would be YA, or you kind of were just doing this research about these queens?
Well, the first two books I've written, which are considered like adult literary genre, they both deal also with young protagonists. I think there's a reason why so many narrators are young protagonists, right? They're young, they're fresh, they're innocent, but they're also coming into independence, coming into their strengths and making decisions for themselves. And I think that's a really exciting time of possibility. I'm a teacher. I teach literature, and I realize I teach at an art school, and a lot of my students are visual artists. And I remember having a hard time getting my students to read novels. Like they wouldn't read. They'd come to class, they'd love to hang out, but they wouldn't read books. And I was just wondering, what can convince you to read? And then I ended up teaching a young adult literature class, and I had no problem with the students reading the books. They were finishing them faster and earlier than the due date. And I realized it was because young adult literature meant so much to them. The books that I think you read when you're a young adult are so influential in the person you become and the person you want to be and the community you want to have. And so I started realizing how powerful and how important young adult literature was. And so when I was thinking about a book about the Chung sisters, at first I wasn't sure. I wasn't sure what the genre was. I just wanted to start writing. And then I liked this idea of reincarnation. And then I just kept taking steps further, I think being influenced by realizing how much possibility there was in the genre. And then it gets really fantastical. And we haven't even talked about the fact that there are dragons in the book. And they're these mythical dragons. And so they're not only, reincarnated souls, but they also are reincarnated from these ancient dragons that created the country. And that was really, really fun, hard, but really, really fun to write, because I realized that young readers will really go anywhere you want if the writing is good, like if you do the work to create the world. And there was something really cathartic about that to write, and really exciting for me to write.
That sounds really, I love books like that, and I'm not young adult, so.
Young adult readers are of all ages. That's the great unifying thing about them too.
Yeah. So do they morph into dragons? Is that what's happened, or does that give away too much?
We learned that their lives as the Chung sisters in Vietnam is not their first life together.
Oh, okay.
They're not only several thousand years old, they're like millions of years old.
Wow, that creates much more backstory than just originally thought.
Yes. Yes. And I think that's really fun to be able to see. I think it was really fascinating to find out like how dragons also transcend so many different cultures. Like there are dragons, myths in Western and Eastern civilizations. There's something about that mystical creature that people really love and are fascinated by, like the strength of them and the mysteriousness of them. And I really wanted to capture that. My son is a dragon, that's his zodiac sign. I'm
Okay.
last year was the year of the dragon. And so I think it means a lot. And people really love to learn more about it. And it's really just fascinating to see how much lore there is around dragons, both in Eastern and Western cultures.
Yeah, there's so much mythology around dragons, and it's like, why have, and for centuries, I think we've been obsessed with dragons.
Oh, yeah.
So, I mean, King Arthur, and way before that,
Yes.
Hopper. Yes, definitely.
I think we all want to be that powerful and that strong.
Yeah, maybe not so, like invincible, like vampires, right? You're invincible, you can live forever, you're powerful, and nothing can hurt you. All this
Absolutely.
stuff, right? And
Yeah.
when we're young, I think maybe we think that still a little bit. Like the world gets scarier to me when you grow up and you see all these lists of things you need to look out for, maybe.
Yes. And if you're a dragon, you're invincible. You don't have those vulnerabilities, right? You can face those fears. You can face those challenges in a way that I think sometimes we feel limited in our human form. And so this idea that these girls can transform themselves from human into dragons is really exciting.
That is very cool. Sounds like an excellent read. When you're reading, did you read a lot of YA? I mean, I guess you're an educator and you had your students reading YA books. Did you take from those what, maybe you just take from your students the teen angst or whatever comes in?
I think we all remember our teen angst very well. It's really interesting. I was recently talking to a friend about the grudges that we carry, because I was like, oh, I don't carry grudges. I'm too old. Like things are, too much has happened. But then as we kept talking and then we were reminiscing about high school, I realized, oh wow, I still carry a lot of that pain inside of me. And even though it's like quiet, but when we are, I think when we're teenagers, when we're young adults, like of course we feel things like so much. Like we feel things so intensely because our hormones are raging, our bodies are developing, we're super self-conscious. We also have a lot of hope and excitement. We're becoming more independent. So the things we experience, we just feel them more deeply and they sit inside of us longer. And I have a young daughter. She's 16 right now and she feels things very deeply. So I get like an insight also into like her adolescence about what it feels like to be a young adult. And those emotions are just incredibly powerful. And even when I remind her, high school is only 4 years, those are
Oh,
4 years you will never forget, right? Like no matter how many years you get away from them, like you remember the joys, you remember the embarrassments, you remember the heartbreaks, you remember the betrayals. They sit with you in a way that I don't think it's different from any other time period, I think, in our lives. And also because you can't get away. You know what I mean? In high school, like if you're mad at someone, if something happens, you still have to see them every day. Like that's
yeah. Yes, the one girl who accused me of cheating on her with her boyfriend or whatever, that never happened, but she was never my friend again. So yeah.
and the fact that she said it, she like, even though it wasn't true, right? She
Well,
said
we
it and
were
it was
supposed to
out
be
there.
best friends. Hello, I wouldn't do that. Anyway, I still need to find her.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
love the secondary character's name, Hong Pham, because in college I had a girlfriend, one of my closest friends was Hong Pham, and she always told me, there's so many of me in the world. I'm like, but there's only one of you. There may be more names like that.
Yes,
So
absolutely.
I contacted her when I saw this name, and I shared the book with her. So
Oh, very nice. She'll like the
yeah,
character. The character is very powerful.
fun.
Yes.
So your first books were We Should Never Meet in 2004. Tell me a little bit about that.
So that was my first book. I wrote it while I was in grad school, and it was my first book, and I felt very lucky to have published it. But that was also, I think all three of my books are kind of born out of my curiosities as a writer and as someone who wanted to learn more about my identity and about the people and community I come from. So We Should Never Meet is a collection of short stories, but they're all linked. So they're all narrated by different characters, but they're surrounding one event. And the event is Operation Baby Lift, which was the emergency evacuation of Vietnamese and Amerasian orphans at the end of the war. And so the 8 stories, 4 of them follow the evacuation. So we meet different people who are part of that evacuation. And then the other 4 stories are set in present day, 25 years after the war, and growing up in America. And I really liked how I was still learning the craft of creative writing. And I felt like that form really helped me understand, like to do the research about the people behind this amazing event, which my mother was a part of. I hadn't realized it when I was writing it, but my mother was a social worker in America, and she helped bring Vietnamese refugees and Vietnamese unaccompanied minors to America at the end of the Vietnam War, after the war. And so I think a lot of her work and a lot of the things that were important to her mattered to me too as a child. And I was starting to write about it and understand it. And so the stories, also the 4 America stories, are narrated by Vietnamese American teenagers who are trying to make sense of their lives here in the world. And they're very realistic, but I think there's also this element of, do you know what I mean? Like, I wanted the stories to talk to each other. So even though the characters in America they don't know everything that happened in the 4 Vietnam stories, like they all share a connection, all 8 of those characters, around the war and around this time. And I think that's something that a lot of people feel about like historical events. Like even if they don't meet each other, they're part of it, like, and they're experiencing the consequences of it, and they experience the memories of them together.
Yeah, I think that's very true, because when we talk to people about 9/11 or like when the Challenger exploded, I mean, I'm dating myself way back when, but everybody remembers where they were and what was happening when they heard about it or when it happened. And I could talk to anybody my age and they would be like, oh yeah, that was like their poignant times in your life, and you remember where you were on these poignant times. So I can imagine, yeah, that would be something that would definitely bind all those characters together.
Yeah, I think history does that, right? And I think that's what's really powerful about history. Like, we're going to have like a lot of events where people can remember, where were we when we learned about this? Like, I certainly remember where I was during the Challenger explosion. I was in my 3rd grade class. I was sitting in the classroom, and I remember my teacher quietly turning off the television, right? But not really completely understanding what was going on, but knowing that, and at the time I really wanted to be an astronaut,
Oh, wow.
when everyone wanted to be an astronaut, right? Like, it's just like this amazing frontier. And I think, yeah, like I think about my own children. What are the historical markers they're going to have? Like, they're certainly going to remember. And we just had the anniversary of the 5 years of the pandemic, right? Like, you remember that last day before the shutdown, like very clearly what they did. Like, my daughter and her friends walked around the playground saying goodbye to things, not even completely realizing. They thought they were saying goodbye for 2 weeks, but they weren't, and I think that's going to have a huge influence on the way they see things and how they connect with people.
Yeah, that is really neat. So the second book, or maybe not the second book you wrote, but the second published book, The Re-Education of Cherry Trong, is that how you pronounce that?
Trong, yes.
Trong. Tell me about that.
That is a novel. So that was my first attempt at writing a novel. And that was also expanding, I think, on the same things I was approaching in the first book. So it involves, again, multiple perspectives. I really love multiple perspectives. That's what was weird about The Lost Queen. It was like, I just stuck with Jolie the whole time. But that was a book where we saw a Vietnamese family after the war, living in France, Vietnam, and America. And so each chapter is narrated by a different family member, but we follow one family member, Cherry, the most. She gets the most chapters. And so it follows the lives of these families and the secrets that they are keeping from each other. And it's about uncovering how the family escaped and the sacrifices they made and the choices they made that benefited some family members and then also sacrificed other family members in order to be able to have these new lives outside of the country. I see both We Should Never Meet and The Re-Education of Cherry Chung as being such interesting time capsules of what I imagined the Vietnamese diaspora, which is the communities outside of Vietnam, to be like, because it's changed. It has changed in the last 50 years. Like April 30th is going to be the 50th anniversary of the end of the Vietnam War.
Oh.
And I cannot believe, I don't know if my parents were alive today, I don't know. They would be just so surprised at everything that has happened. Do you know what I mean? Like when they first left Vietnam in the late 60s, and most of my family left, after the war in 1975, they thought Vietnam was over. They cried for the end of their country and they were trying to start new lives in America. And America was seen as this great, hope of a chance to start over. And so much has changed in 50 years. Now I have cousins who moved back, right? To live in Vietnam. I have family who's decided, to do different things. Vietnam isn't seen as this, tragedy anymore. Like there's reconciliation. People are going back and people are communicating in. And so it says a lot about how in history, like we only get part of it, and it doesn't stay the same. It's always changing.
Both of these books sound so inspiring and just so rich.
Oh, thank you.
All that history, yeah. I have the person who owns the nail salon here was she married into the family that was overturned during the Vietnam War. So the United States brought them here to protect them, and
right.
her parents still live there. But her story is really neat. She has like 5 kids who are grown with their own kids now, and both her and her husband own these businesses, and it's just really neat to talk to her. So that's true.
It is, and it's also something I think it's very similar in terms of like everyone's families were we're all shaped by the history. We're all shaped by the events of that. Everyone has a story in the Vietnamese community about how their family, what happened after the war, where did they go, how they escaped, where did they go, what refugee camp they went to, how did everyone come back together, did they come back together? A lot of families were broken, right? A lot of families, like, parents were separated from each other, they started new families, or children were separated from each other, like brothers and sisters, for years, sometimes decades. And it's so shaped, I think, it's so changed the trajectory of everyone's histories. And I think that's why people get so attached to traditions, because they can get changed so quickly. Do you know what I mean? And when you hold on to something like that, that is something that you can return to. That is something that is like a common ground that you can have to remember.
I think that's so true in many cultures too, because I see that from World War II as well. My husband's family is Polish, and his grandfather came here and started a new family with a new wife, and then they learned that there was another wife and some other kids, and I think that story repeats itself for those countries that are war torn. So it's so hard.
It is.
Well, tell me some authors that inspire you and that you like to read.
That's a wonderful question. I should always be more prepared for it. When I was first starting to realize that I could be a writer, there were 2 books that were definitely, and they're the books that influenced, I think, a lot of Asian American writers. The first was Maxine Hong Kingston books, The Woman Warrior, right, which was a story about her family's migration from China to America. There was Aimee Phan's The Joy Luck Club, which taught me, I can do this. There's a place for writing about women, about Asian women and their stories. And I thought that was incredibly powerful. Jessica Hagedorn's Dog Eaters, which is a book about the Philippines, and also takes this style of like rotating narrators, and she uses like newspaper clippings and like soap opera radio stories in there to tell this kind of pastiche story about the Philippines. Those books were really formative to me. I think I was so hungry to read about characters who look like me, because you didn't get them very much, right? Ruth Ozeki's books have always been incredibly inspiring to me. They're stories that are vast and complicated, and I think what's really exciting about literature now is that we're just getting so many more stories like that, like really, really exciting, complex stories. That when I first was studying Asian American literature as an undergrad at UCLA, there was only one Vietnamese American book that was published by a major publisher. Now it's amazing. Like this year alone, there are at least like 15 Vietnamese American young adult novels. Like that's just awesome to me and incredible. And it speaks about how far I think literature has come to be able to show so many diverse voices.
Yeah, that's very cool. I agree. So this is a question I love to ask. Hopefully it won't stump you too much, but if there's one thing you want someone to take away from The Lost Queen, one feeling, one experience, what would you say that is?
I think I was really inspired to write about a character who thought she was powerless. And I think most humans can feel that way, right? Most individuals can feel that, like, what difference can I make? When we meet Jolie, she's pretty low. She's pretty defeated. She's given up in many ways. And I think the book, as she is experiencing all these like strange things happening and meeting all these different kind of fantastical characters, she realizes that she can trust herself and that she has much more strength and much more power than she thought. Not just the magical power, but the ability to like believe in yourself. I think that is something that's really important. And I love how empowered she gets. That's my favorite thing that happens in any kind of narrative, is when a character you think is just totally beaten down suddenly stands up, you're right, and suddenly develops, and you as a reader are like, yes, I am with you. I want you to conquer this. And I was really inspired by other books that show us characters like that, characters who just don't give up. And I think Jolie is someone who doesn't give up. So if there is a lesson, it's just, you're not out yet, right?
Yeah, because it sounds like, I mean, she had to make the choice to save her friend, and or if she had to decide that she could save her friend, right? If she'd never done, she had to realize that within herself. So she has to constantly make those choices for herself, and that is making your own choice is power, right?
Yes, absolutely. And also trusting yourself, and trusting even when other people are telling you otherwise, that you are weak, that you don't have power, that you're a loser, that you should be quiet. No, you don't have to be quiet. You don't have to sit down. You can stand up.
That's awesome. Yeah. So in this podcast, I call it Finding the Magic Podcast, because it's finding the magic within yourself as well as within the books. So I love those themes. Thank you so much for being here. So when is your book releasing? I saw late 2025. I wasn't exactly sure.
May 6th.
May 6th. Okay, so pretty soon. That's exciting.
Yes, thank you.
Yes, congratulations. Tell everyone where we can find the book, The Lost Queen.
You can find it anywhere. It's being sold at every retailer's, any independent bookstore, Amazon, Barnes & Noble, anywhere. And they can just go to Penguin Random House and go to that author page, and they'll show you all the links about where to go.
Okay, is that the best way to get in touch with you, be on your newsletter, all those type of things too?
I have a website too. It's called aimeephanwrites.com. And you can also find me on Instagram and TikTok at Aimee Phan Writes.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Aimee, for being here. And hopefully I'll have you back when you release your next book.
Thank you so much, Trisha.
Bye.
Bye.
I hope you enjoyed this episode of the Finding the Magic podcast. I'm your host, author and podcaster Trisha Copeland, and I love getting behind the scenes. If you like the podcast, make sure to subscribe and stop in each week
discover new authors and books. Thanks for listening, and until next time, keep finding the magic.